Joining us to discuss all this, John Thune of South Dakota, chair of the Senate Republican Conference. And from Rhode Island, Democrat Sheldon Whitehouse, a member of the Senate Environment Committee. Senator Whitehouse, you are one of the leading environmentalists in the Senate. In fact, you make speeches on the subject almost every week on the Senate floor. Have you been assured by the White House that if the Senate goes ahead and passes the Keystone approval, that the president will veto it?
Our information is that they're leaning that way, but I don't have a hard assurance.
And how confident are you that, in fact, he will veto it?
I hope and expect that he will. I think it's important to send that signal right off the bat. I think the new Republican majority has long despised and denigrated this president, and if they can roll him, I think they would like to. And I think it's important that he sets the stage early on this, particularly where the stakes are so high for climate, for the environment, for the damage that the pipeline will do.
Senator Thune, the Democratic leader in the Senate, Harry Reid, has blocked any vote on the Keystone Pipeline for years. Is it your belief that he's finally agreeing to this vote to help Mary Landrieu, who's in a runoff in the Louisiana Senate race of the early first week in December, with a show vote on this, with the full expectation that it's going to get vetoed by the president anyway, that in fact this is all political?
Well, sure it is, Chris, and this is John Hoeven's bill. He introduced this bill. He's been trying to get a vote on it now for years.
We should point out that he's
a
senator from South Dakota.
Senator from North Dakota,
Sorry.
Correct. He's my colleague from north of the border. But the point is, this is a cynical attempt to save a Senate seat in Louisiana. If the Democrats were serious about this, we would have voted on this years ago. I mean, this thing's been hanging around now for 6 years. There's been 5 environmental impact reviews of the Keystone Pipeline, all of which have come back and said it would have minimal impact on the environment. The president's own State Department says it would support over 40,000 jobs. In my state of South Dakota, 3,000 to 4,000 jobs, $100 million in earnings, $20 million in property tax revenue. This is an issue, a no-brainer in the eyes of the American public, which finally is coming to the floor of the United States Senate, not because they're worried about American jobs, but because they're worried about the job of a senator from Louisiana.
Let's drill down, if you will, into the merits of the Keystone Pipeline. President Obama was pretty defiant about the pipeline and his approval for it this week in Asia. Let's take a look.
I have to constantly push back against this idea that somehow the Keystone Pipeline is either this massive jobs bill for the United States or is somehow lowering gas prices. Understand what this project is. It is providing the ability of Canada to pump their oil, send it through our land down to the Gulf where it will be sold everywhere else. And it doesn't have an impact on U.S. gas prices.
But let's take a look at the facts. The State Department says the project would create 12,000 direct and related jobs near the pipeline, perhaps tens of thousands more further away from the pipeline. And it's not just Canadian crude, as the president said. It would also carry 100,000 barrels a day from Montana and North Dakota. And Senator Whitehouse, oil markets are global. If you put more supply into any part of the system, it's going to lower prices, at least marginally, everywhere. The president's wrong on a bunch of these points.
Well, the difference here is that the tar sands is probably the filthiest fuel on the planet. And when you add that into the equation, you dramatically increase the effect of carbon pollution and of greenhouse gases. Now, our friends on the other side won't agree that any of this is real. They will never treat climate change seriously. And so they just look at the one side of the ledger, which is a bunch of jobs. And I think it's 4,000 direct jobs, which is good. I mean, I'm not going to try to deprecate that, but we're growing at 200,000 jobs a month in this economy. And the last Environment and Public Works bill for the highways would have been 1.8 million jobs. So this is no jobs game changer. And I should correct one thing. Harry Reid twice offered votes on Keystone on the Shaheen bill. And the Republicans refused to allow those votes because they didn't want the Shaheen bill to pass before the election. It would have been good for her in New Hampshire to have passed a major piece of bipada legislation like that. So the Republicans have had the chance to vote on Keystone and turned it down.
Let me bring in Senator Thune, and let's talk about this issue of the pollution, because the argument against the pipeline is that the kind of Canadian crude we're talking about here, oil from tar sands, creates 17% more greenhouse gases than typical oil, and at full capacity the pipeline would create as much carbon pollution as 5 million new cars on the road. What's your answer to that, sir?
Well, in 2011, Chris, what the State Department said is that the oil coming out of Canada would replace the same type of oil that's coming in from Venezuela. And remember, Canada's going to produce this oil. It's just a question of whether we're going to benefit from it or the Chinese are going to benefit from it. And you add to that the fact that the light sweet crude oil coming out of the Bakken in North Dakota, 100,000 barrels of that can go in the pipeline on a daily basis, which takes pressure off an already stressed rail system that's making it more difficult for people and producers in my part of the country to get their agricultural commodities to the marketplace. It isn't a question of whether or not this is going to get done. It's going to get done. The Canadians are going to produce the oil. The only question is whether or not America is going to benefit from it, and we're going to get the jobs that come with it, and whether we're going to replace the oil, the same type of oil that's coming in from Venezuela, which is what the State Department said this project would do.
All right, let's talk about the other big development this week.
We actually dispute that.
If I may, because we need to move along. I know we could continue this debate for a long time.
But just put me on record as disputing the facts there, because I don't think Senator Thune was accurate.
You are duly noted as disputing the facts, Senator Whitehead. The president also announced a climate deal with China this week, and let's take a look at that. The U.S. would emit 26 to 28% less carbon in 2025 than it did in 2005. China agrees to cap its carbon emissions by 2030 when it says 20% of its energy will come from clean sources. Here's how Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell reacted to this deal.
As I read the agreement, requires the Chinese to do nothing at all for 16 years, while these carbon emission regulations are creating havoc in my state and other states around the country.
Senator Whitehouse, aren't we, in the terms of this deal, committed to doing, just as McConnell says, a lot more than the Chinese?
In order to reach that 2030 target, the Chinese are going to have to build a clean energy portfolio that is as big as the entire U.S. energy fleet. So between now and 2030, they're going to build an immense amount of clean energy. That's actually going to be good for American suppliers into those projects. A lot of this is American design. So nobody's going to build that much capacity on New Year's Eve of 2030. The minority leader, now soon to be majority leader, is just wrong about that. And in terms of the havoc that the so-called regulations of all of this are claimed to create by the minority leader, you know, in Rhode Island, we're seeing the havoc from the carbon pollution. We're seeing the havoc along our coastlines, houses falling into the sea.
Right.
We're seeing the havoc with fishermen going out to sea and finding fish that their parents, grandparents never saw before. As one said to me, it's getting weird out there, Sheldon.
Senator Thune, briefly, because I want to move on to immigration, but if you can, in about 30 seconds or so, when 97% of scientific papers say that human activity does add to climate change, without getting into all the details, don't we have to do something?
Well, look, climate change is occurring. It's always occurring, Chris. There are a number of factors that contribute to that, including human activity. The question is, what are we going to do about it and at what cost? And what the president agreed to was a bad deal. It's all pain and no gain for the American people. It's one-sided. It's non-binding. There's a hope that someday down the road, the Chinese might actually reduce. At the same time, the United States reduces its reductions or makes reductions twice what we're planning right now. And what that means is a 90% increase in utility rates for people, low-income people in places like South Dakota. And I guess what I would say to that is, if you trust the Chinese on something like this, I've got some oceanfront property here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota for you, because this is a one-sided and it is a non-binding deal that we've agreed to, and I don't expect that we're ever going to see China agree to it in the end.
All right, finally, we got a couple of minutes left, and I want to just get into this immigration issue because the president has made it clear he plans to take executive action to defer deportations for millions of people who are in this country illegally. Senator Thune, are Republican leaders now seriously considering somehow linking opposition to executive action with government funding, either by setting up a situation that will result in a government shutdown when funding runs out on December 11th, or just passing these short-term bills month by month and keeping this fight going and holding government funding hostage?
I think Republicans, Chris, are looking at different options about how best to respond to the president's unilateral action, which many people believe is unconstitutional, unlawful action on this particular issue. But my concern is, shutting the government down doesn't solve the problem. My concern is what happens if we end up shutting down what could be a record of legislative accomplishment that's there for the taking if the president would choose cooperation instead of conflict. This president right now is choosing friction, partisanship, and accomplishment, or I should say in partisanship, instead of cooperation. There's an opportunity for us to get some things done here, and instead the president is going down this unilateral path, and it's going to make it very hard for us to get anything done on immigration or any other issue for that matter.
So very briefly, you're saying that you don't think that Republicans should take the bait, if you will, and do anything to shut down the government?
Well, it doesn't solve the problem, Chris, but look, we're having those discussions. We were only in for a couple of days this last week. We're going to continue to meet about this. I know the House leaders are talking about it, the Senate leaders are talking about it, but the fact of the matter is the president would be well served not to go down this path, because he is putting at risk and in peril a real opportunity here to do some things for the country.
And unfortunately, we got less than 30 seconds left. Senator Whitehouse, should the president take this executive action soon? Some people are saying as early as this week, or should he wait until after Congress passes government funding before it runs out on December 11th?
We've got a broken immigration system, which is why Republicans and Democrats came together in the Senate to pass in a very strong way a bipartisan immigration bill that has been sitting over in the House and that Speaker Boehner won't bring up because he wants to protect his hard right-wing extremists.
If I can just get you to answer the question, should he wait or not?
So it's right there to be done. I think that he should force the hand of the Speaker and have him take up our bipartisan bill. The real story here is a Speaker who won't pass bipartisan immigration reform.
And
we have a broken system. The president has to do something.
And force the hand by taking executive action right away?
Or I think that could be negotiable. But the threat of real and unilateral executive action is all that will drive the Speaker's hand. Otherwise, we'll be just left with the broken immigration system and a lot of political talk.
All right,
let's pass the Senate bipartisan bill.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Senator Whitehouse, Senator Thune, thank you both. Thanks for joining us.